I am super excited to welcome Kute Blackson back to the Terri Cole Show. So welcome back, Kute.
Thanks for having me back.
Indeed. If you don't know him, you want to. I was the first time that I interviewed you actually was in 2016. You
Wow.
had a book out then. I think it's You Are the One. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
That I actually ended up giving to one of my sisters who was struggling massively. She had lost her daughter and a super painful experience. And that book literally changed her life.
Mm.
So I just say that because, I never reached back. We didn't talk about it, but it was something that it actually
Wow, wow.
changed her life. And it was so interesting because she still will say, Coot would say, I'm like, first name basis with him. But anyway, so I know that your
Wow,
ripple is out there, but that was like a personal experience that I
wow.
had with my sister, which really helped. Anyway,
Say
for those of you who
say say
don't
hi.
know him,
Say hi to your sister.
oh my God, she's going to be so excited. If you don't know Kute Blackson, he's a beloved inspirational speaker, transformational teacher. He's the author of the national best-selling book we were just talking about, You Are the One, and his new book called The Magic of Surrender, which is a topic that I'm super lit up about talking about, and I cannot wait to read your book. But it comes out May 4th. Yeah.
May 4th, yes, May 4th.
Very exciting. He's widely considered the next generation leader in the field of personal development and has been featured on Larry King Live, Fox and Friends, Dr. Drew, as well as Inc. magazine calls him the mindfulness guru billionaires go to for advice. And we have him on the Terri Cole Show. So welcome.
Great to be here. I'm always honored. Thanks for having me back.
Sure.
I've been looking forward to this interview.
Me too. It got me actually looking at the last one, and like so much has changed in both of our lives and careers in that time. But I was like, yeah, that was so fun. And I really loved that book too. So I'm super psyched that you have a new one out. Let's talk a little bit about why surrender, though. I'm really interested.
Look, this was not the topic, honestly, that I thought I was going to write about. I had all of these ideas for another book, books I thought would sell, books I thought would be catchy, titles I thought would be, just hip and sexy and what have you, and that would hook people's minds. And I had no idea this was going to be the book. And how it really started was after You Are the One came out. 2016 became a bestseller. I was, I was on a high. The end of 2016, I get a phone call from my father. And basically, I'm notified that my mother has stomach cancer. Mm. And it was like someone punched me in the gut. I'm on a high, and then boom. My mother was the person I love the most on the planet, the closest person. Just, what do you mean? This is not possible, right? And so I start flying to London from Los Angeles once a month to be with my mother. And I'm trying to save her, I'm trying to help her, I'm trying to fix her, I'm trying to do all of this stuff. I'm trying to heal her. And it was very challenging, but it was actually the best year of my life. I got to just be with my mother and talk to my mother and hold her hand in chemo and talk about nothing and everything. And during that time, the seed of surrender was planted because I never saw her complain. And she was a very emotional woman. I'm not saying glorifying, not being emotional, complaining. Never saw her complain, never saw her moan, never saw her feel like a victim. Somehow she was at complete peace during this entire year. Mm-hmm. And when the doctors, so it took me through a process of realizing I can't save my mother, who I tried to save as a little boy growing up and did everything to save. Like, here I am, like, she's gonna die, and having to just surrender her to the universe, which was really, really tough. But when the doctor said to her, I was there, we can't help you. You have days or months or maybe weeks to live. Get your affairs in order. I looked at my mother and I said, are you afraid? And she said, no, I'm not afraid. And she meant it. She said, I'm not afraid because I realize I know that I'm not just this body. I'm an infinite spirit, and this body is temporary. And so I said to her, can I do something for you? Can I buy you, take you? What can I do to make your life easier, And she said, there's nothing. This is what really hit me. She said, there's nothing that I need. There's nothing I want from life. So I said, what do you want? And she says to me, the only thing I want is what God wants for my life. And I thought, whoa. And what really struck me was not so much a religious thing, but she was in surrender to life and the highest unfolding for her soul's destiny, her soul's evolution. Whether it was living or whether it was dying, she was at peace and she was surrendered to that. And this was her freedom. And I looked at this little Japanese woman and I realized, to me, she was just my mom. And I realized this was the key to her life. She married an African guy she didn't know, couldn't speak English, went to Africa in the 70s, in the middle of nowhere. And I mean, talk about surrender, And I realized that this is a great woman. And her greatness isn't that she's the richest, the famous, or has followers. It's in the depth of her surrender to the divine, the depth of her surrender to her soul. And she never wavered in that. And so when she died, everything started hitting me. And the soul of the book hit me. It's like I was looking at a whiteboard one day, all these titles, all these ideas, surrender. Like, Kute, this is the book you were born to write. And I resisted it. And then I just had to say, okay, I'm gonna trust and I'm gonna surrender that this is what is seeking to happen. And I felt the soul of the book and everything started flowing and came through and unfolded. And this was, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre-everything. It wasn't like, oh, pandemic happened, let's write about surrender. It was done before 2020. And then I started to feel when COVID was happening, there's something to this book. There's something that the universe is using me to deliver this message of surrender in a modern context, because I couldn't have planned the timing of the title in the book and anything. And so, I'm just, I feel like I'm in service to the book and on for the ride.
But how it's such a, thank you for sharing. That's a beautiful story. And yet your energy, right? You're the way that you talk in your videos and, you are very forward motion. You've got all of this
Yes.
life force just like pouring out of you, And so how difficult was this concept for you to accept that when it comes to end of life things, there is nothing to do? And where was the beauty in the surrender,
I realized that honestly, my whole life had really, I was birthed from surrender, from my parents, from how my father lived. It was kind of what I lived in a certain sense, and there was always through my life when I really looked, yes, the forward motion, the passion, but when I really felt deeper, I have always unapologetically, and I'll be honest, it has not been easy. It has not always been easy. I have always unapologetically followed the guidance of my soul. Even if it's meant being broke, even if it's meant ending relationships, even if it's meant, sleeping on couches and not knowing how I'm going to eat and survive and make it, and leaving my father's church. And I was supposed to take over my father's churches and the successors to his churches. And I was guided no. And I thought I was crazy because, sometimes what we're guided to do doesn't make sense to our minds. And so for me, it's been a process of giving up giving up the need, or my need to know, giving up my need to know what everything means and where it's going. And because I used to be someone that's like, I got to know what everything means. I've got to understand where this is going. And that was, I realized for me, a form of control. And I mean, how much control do we really have? I think if anything, last year showed us we had all these great plans, and universe reminding us you're not really in control as much as you thought you were. And so for me, I really saw it. The process of the book really took me back to the purity of my roots, of where I came from, of the kid that gave up everything. I mean, everything to come to America at 18 and with 2 suitcases and said, I'm not going to compromise my soul. And every step of the way, I realized every important decision, every pivotal decision I made through my life, I followed my soul. I remember one time I walked away from two of the biggest managers in Hollywood. I wanted to be the next Oprah, you know, and I walked away, two of the like guys that represented DiCaprio and J-Lo and Michael Jackson, and like, we're going to make you a star, kid. I was 21 years old, 22. And everything in my soul, Terri said, no, this is not right. They're not right. And I toiled and I screamed and I cried and I grieved and I fought. I tried to negotiate, and it's like, no, this is not right. And I thought I was crazy. So I'll be honest, sometimes for me, following the path of my soul or the path of my deepest truth, surrendering to my deepest truth in the moments has not always been easy, has sometimes been difficult. Sometimes I have fought it. Sometimes I thought I was cursed. Why can't I just go for, go for what I want? But the deeper I go, the more I follow that path of truth. Then I look back now with a bit of, experience. I realize, oh, I'm glad that thing that I thought I wanted didn't happen because I wasn't ready yet. Or I'm glad that relationship didn't happen, even though I was so intending it to, because it was not aligned. I would not have been able to fulfill my dharma and destiny. And so I think it's been through the process of so many things growing up not happening that humbled me and broke me and, cracked the ego in me a little bit to realize, okay, there's a deeper intelligence, And so the process of losing my mother was another one of those letting go. Because in the beginning, I tried to do everything to save her and fix her and kale and juicing and this. And honestly, she didn't want any of it, She was like, I'm at peace with whatever God wants.
Right. But a lot of times we're doing that for ourselves. It's like,
exactly,
we don't want to let go.
Yeah.
And I think I wanted to go back to something you said before that was so, I think, incredibly common, that we really want to know.
Yes.
Right. It's this illusion of having control. If I know, then I can prevent the bad thing or the painful thing. And, Deepak Chopra years ago, when I was doing some week-long thing, talked about that the infinite possibilities of our life exist in the unknown.
Yeah.
And that if we can get, and really it's getting real kind of with what you've said, right? Because so much of it is an illusion, last year showed us. But if we can get okay in the not knowing and having faith that there is some kind of a divine something. And again, I don't believe myself. I don't believe in like destiny in the way of like it's written in stone and I could just sit and eat bonbons on my couch and it's going to happen, right?
No.
But dharma and purpose in life, yes. And knowing that the fact that you could walk away from something that lots and lots of people were like, are you nuts? Why wouldn't you go with those managers? They're going to make you a star, kid. And your gut telling you no, and being able to surrender to that truth. To me, there's a strength of character in that, because it's hard to go against what other people think you should do. Sometimes it can be difficult.
But I also realized that as I track my life, which also gave me the courage to surrender even more today, because the moments I did not surrender to my truth, the moments I didn't, and I just did whatever I thought I wanted to do, it never really turned out. It was okay, but it never really was fulfilling. It never turned out how I imagined. Shit never turned out well. And life usually kicked me in the ass, and in some way. And so it's funny, the deeper I go now, the less choice I feel I have, the freer I feel. And when my mother died, as I reflected on her life, as I reflected on even the great ones, Mandela, Martin Luther King, Jesus, Buddha, Colin Kaepernick, Muhammad Ali, you know, people we consider great in some way, I think they all got to the point where they didn't have a choice. I mean, yes, they had a choice.
Right, but I know what you mean.
But they didn't have a choice with something, you know, Martin Luther King, where they wanted him to be the head of the civil rights movement, you know, and he was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And it took him a few years because he realized what that might mean. There came a point where this impulse of life was too big, and he realized, my life is not my life anymore. I don't have a choice. I have to let go and
Right.
allow. I think it's when we surrender and let go that we open to, you were talking about the infinite possibilities of life to live through us and express through us. And I think that's when things start happening that we could not have intended and planned and manifested with our conscious intention. It's bigger than us, you know, and I think that's for me the magic. And in terms of trust, someone was asking me the other day, how do we trust life? How do you trust? And it was funny because I said to him spontaneously, I said, how do you not trust life? If we really look at each moment of life on one level, every breath we're taking, if we really pay attention, every breath we take is kind of a proof of this intelligence. There are trillions of processes happening inside of our bodies right now as we're having this conversation. In spite of us, we're not sitting here going, breathe, 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 digest. It's just unfolding. It's happening. The sun comes out if we just pay attention to nature. And I think as human beings, we sometimes we've lost touch with the fact that we are a part of a greater unfolding and intelligence of nature, you know? And I think if we look at the sun, I've never seen a day where, Terry, the sun didn't come out and just forgot to come out. So there's an intelligence, you know, there's an intelligence of life, call it energy, call it God, call it consciousness, call it whatever you want. It's, to me, this intelligence has been around for billions of years and it's unfolding all of existence, 8 billion people, me, you, all the species, and it's life, it's happening, you know, and so, yeah, surrendering to that is exciting now.
Yeah. All right. So what do you say to people who are watching or listening, for the average person who may be unaware of the ways that they are not surrendering in life? So how can someone know if they're sort of in conflict with their ability or their willingness to surrender? Like, what does it look like? And then how can they take some steps towards more surrender?
You know, I think could look like different things, but it might look like life being stagnant, or it might look like, let's say, not being in flow, when things kind of aren't, you know, not disjointed and they're not quite flowing in a certain way. I mean, life can be challenging, but there's still a flow. And I think when that flow isn't happening, even in the challenge, that can be a sign that we're holding on and we're not surrendering. So the energy of life gets restricted. That can be one way. Sometimes we might feel certain levels of pain within ourselves, frustration, depression, anxiety. To me, these can be signs that we're also not surrendering and we're holding on, we're controlling, we're manipulating, we're forcing. And so I think when we can just observe that, you know, as a beginning to say, okay. You know, just to kind of paint a bit of a map, this is not in the book, but I was thinking the other day, there's moments where at first we might be in denial that something needs to shift. You know, we're in denial, like, well, we don't even know that there's a different way. We don't even know that something needs to shift. Then maybe we move, maybe we read a book or a podcast, and we start questioning, like something feels off. We feel some pain, and then we move into an awareness that something needs to shift, but there's still a fear of, if I really make the shift, what will happen to my life? And so there's a certain egoic resistance to really shifting because we're afraid of what might change. So the ego starts kind of holding on to its own identity or the structure it's built. So we move into a zone of resistance, so to speak, right? And then that next phase I've seen is where we've resisted enough, but now we're clear something needs to shift, and we start negotiating in our minds about, well, if I hold on and I do this, then I don't do that, then maybe I don't have to really shift. Maybe I don't have to let go of this relationship, even though I know it's not really aligned, because they got a lot of potential, but we know in our hearts that perhaps it's not really aligned. But we're negotiating with life, we're negotiating our destiny. I think there comes a moment where we have to be aware of what we're doing. And one of the things we can do in this phase where we're not in the flow, I found, is the willingness to really just be honest with ourselves about where we're at. And in the honesty, that doesn't mean you surrender. It just might mean the willingness to just own where you're at and have the compassion, and surrender to the humanness of where you're at. But rather than lying to yourself about where you're at, pretending that you're somewhere else, just being honest about, I'm afraid. This is where I'm at right now. And I'm not surrendered right now. And sometimes it might mean surrendering to your humanity of not being surrendered in this moment and holding yourself with an empathy and a compassion and having that sort of spacious relationship to say, this is where I'm at, and let me just be with myself and love myself through this moment. And so that can be a dimension of surrender. And so one of the things I think that helps is the willingness to tell ourselves the truth. So what lies am I telling myself? What am I pretending to not know? And just be with that. Let that marinate for a moment. And so that stage of resistance to negotiation then moves into, let's say, a stage of realizing that no matter how much we negotiate, life isn't going to change. He is going to be what he is. She is going to be what she is. I am going to be what I am. So finally, we start moving into a zone of, let's say, acceptance. Accepting what is. We often hear that phrase, accepting what is. The challenge is, I think that acceptance doesn't always mean surrender. We can be in acceptance, but still internally be resisting inside of ourselves. And so, like if it's raining outside, we can still be moaning and groaning and complaining. We take the umbrella, but it's raining, but why does it have to be raining? So there's there's that resistance of, shit, why is it raining? The experience I'm having is not the experience I should be having. I should be having some other experience, but okay, I'll deal with the rain. And so surrender to me is that open-hearted participation with the process of what's happening. The open-hearted participation that I think comes when we understand, or at least the belief when we understand that the universe is always working for my highest good. That's something that really helps me, that belief and understanding that everything is always happening for my highest good, even if I can't see it right now in this moment. So if something drops out of my life, there's a belief, there's a trust of, okay, this relationship moved on. I really want it to be that. But if the universe is always working for my highest good, that must mean something better is in store. I don't have to know what the better is, but it's something better in store. And so
I totally agree with that. And I think that I used to always say, and I still do, the universe is always conspiring in my favor. It's like leaning into what I want to support what I want. And that's a belief, right? That's a way of being in the world. Your story about acceptance, the difference between acceptance and surrender, reminded me of a friend of mine who worked in Hollywood for many years as a script supervisor. And I mean, I love her to death. She was my assistant years ago. And she, every week when I would talk to her, she would be like, oh my God, I sat in traffic for a total of 17 and a half hours this week going out to Long Beach. Like, I just can't, and I was like, dude, there are so many things. For 17 and a half hours, you could be listening to a book on tape. You could be calling the folks you haven't spoken to.
Exactly.
You could bust out some lavender oil. You could learn a friggin' language. Like, there's a million things you could do, but it's like the acceptance piece was I'm keeping track of it and I want to complain about it.
Yeah.
And telling us. And yet the surrender, what I was wanting for her was the surrender. Like, you live in LA. You drive out to, you're going to sit in traffic every friggin' day unless everyone gets abducted by aliens, because that is the way it is.
Yes.
And exactly what you said, like accepting what is. But how do we then change the experience?
To move from acceptance to what I call open-hearted surrender, authentic open-hearted surrender, is also that realization, I think, that to me, if life is a process of evolution and as souls we incarnate to evolve, then it's the willingness to use every experience and learn the lesson from every experience and relationship to evolve and grow. So it's the surrender to participate with, okay, even if it's challenging, even if it's difficult, what is my soul seeking to learn here? And let me go for the learning, so that even if the situation doesn't work out how we want, even if the relationship doesn't work out how we want, I think when we really learn the soul lessons in a situation or an experience or an environment, we always win, and so surrendering to that. So between acceptance and, let's say, surrender, there's a phase that I think a lot of people tend to miss, and I'll call it grieving. Because surrender is a kind of death. It's a death of the idea of the life I thought I was going to live, the idea of who I thought I was going to be at this age, the idea of the death of the idea of who I thought I was going to be, the death of this relationship or that I thought was going to be. It's a death. It requires a letting go of a certain identity, a certain old concept. And so I think many times we don't get to the full open-hearted surrender because we don't allow ourselves to grieve the death on a human level. And because sometimes we're afraid that if we grieve, it will last forever. We're afraid if we grieve, it's not a high vibration feeling to feel. We're afraid that if we really grieve, we'll stay stuck in it in some way. And so in many ways we suppress the grief, but I think when we suppress the grief, we keep ourselves energetically stuck and kind of end up carrying that into a next situation or relationship. But it's through the grief and allowing the grief to move through, not wallowing in it, but allowing it to move through, that we can, I think, peel that layer away and allow ourselves to open our hearts even more. Like, for instance, when my mother passed away, there was profound grief. And it was only by allowing the grieving that I could let go of her. Sometimes we don't allow the grieving as a way to hold on, and it's through the grieving that I access more loving. And so when we suppress the grieving, we suppress the loving in a certain sense. So I think to really access that open-hearted surrender requires a moment, an allowing of the human process of grieving the old, grieving what was, grieving who we were, so that we don't have to carry that old energy into the new. And then we move into surrender, and then the kind of a last phase, I think we move into the flow. So I think grieving is really important.
I totally agree from a therapeutic point of view. And that I think that clients, and myself included, there's a resistance to, I remember when I met my husband, he was widowed and had 3 teenage sons, kind of acting out at that time. And I fell in love with them, and we got married, and we got, 10 years of family therapy. We got it all straightened out. And I was so happy. I never really thought I was going to get married until I met this person. And even though the situation was so complicated, I was like, but you're definitely my person. You could have like 25 teenagers and I would have been like, love will find a way. And in the process, I remember going to my therapist and being sad that I hadn't had spent time with my husband when we were both in our 20s, right? By the time I got to him, he was in his early 40s. And so I wouldn't have those experiences. I wouldn't have those first experiences. I wouldn't birth a biological kid. I wouldn't. And I was so happy to have found him. And she explained it to me this way. She said, Tara, you have to mourn the way you thought it was going to be, in order to be fully present
exactly,
to the beauty because it was this family, my life now, and that's 24 years ago. But, this certainly is my destiny. These people are my people. And yet it was like she gave me permission to honor the way that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And realizing it's not an either or. To mourn doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It means you are honoring your experience and making room for the now.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And when we don't, then there's usually a part of our heart that is not fully available in the now, you know, and
Without a doubt.
that's what we, and you know, and I think it's so important because even in the spiritual field, I see a lot of folks doing, we'll call it spiritual bypass, you know, of like, no, law of attraction. Let's stay high vibe, only high vibe, no negative feelings, and like it's bad for some reason. The challenge of what they don't realize is when you suppress that, it stays stuck in your psyche, in your body, in your nervous system, and you'll end up kind of creating experiences, attracting experiences that kind of reflect what you haven't processed. And so,
Without a doubt, it's interesting. The whole, I came up with this term because I was seeing so much of this a bunch of like 4 or 5 years ago in our self-help sort of world of hyperpositivity,
yes, hyper positivity.
where you're like, something terrible happens to someone, and someone saying to them, everything happens for a reason, just not that helpful. Like, maybe, perhaps, but that's not comforting now. That made you feel better to say,
Yes.
but this is my experience and my pain. And there's this whole skill of witnessing and honoring. And I think that surrendering to what is in the moment, even with the people that we love, even with the situations that we're in, where you're able to not feel the need to take control of someone else's narrative or their pain or their anything.
Yeah.
And we could ask, hey, how can I best support you right now? Sure, like that would be fine. But this automatic needing to like whitewash or to make it okay or to make it spiritual, make it fit in this spiritual box, so dehumanizing. I was like, this is so not nice. And it's really not about the person who is in pain. It's really about the person who can't tolerate that person's pain,
Yeah. For sure. I fully agree.
All right, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, so your book came out 2 days ago. So first of all, let's just tell us where people can get it. Just everywhere that books are sold, right? At this point,
it's everywhere books are sold, Amazon, but also themagicofsurrender.com. If they go there, once they enter www.themagicofsurrender.com, you enter your name and email and receipt. Then you get a whole bunch of gifts and support materials and all of that good stuff.
I'm so excited. I'm going there right after we get off. In the meantime, I've been talking about boundaries. I had a book on boundaries that came out a couple of weeks ago.
Amazing.
So it's, oh my God. So talk about writing my very first book during my very first pandemic. That was interesting.
Wow.
When it came to boundaries. But I'm asking everyone because I'm so interested, especially in people who are leaders and writing books about these things. I want to ask you personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it? That's the first question.
Challenging boundary struggle. I think, wow, the need to, the part of me that always wants to help people. And it's something I've had from being a child, being so sensitive to people's, I'll be specific, being specifically around women and my mother. Because growing up, I was her emotional husband. She would cry because stuff with my father, this, that, and she was very emotional. So I was the one that was always there, loving her, being there, taking care of her, making her laugh, healing her in a sense, and so the boundaries between me and her just sort of blurred and got enmeshed, and her feeling was my feeling and my feeling was her feeling. And so growing up, my relationship with women romantically, but also just women, there was a sense of the need to heal and take care. And I couldn't be with her not being whatever it was that she was, and so that was really, 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 really challenging. And it took, honestly, it wasn't one moment. It wasn't, I wish I could say it's like one session, one moment, one technique, but it was just a process of, through relationship and time, taking the time to get in touch with my own pain, because I realized that part of it was my own, part of my need to fix was and heal was my own way of trying to cope with my own discomfort and my own pain.
Yep.
And so learning to presence that, learning to be with that, learning to hold that, learning to not just react in like, let me help, let me fix, and just
Right.
just learning to love that part of myself and that little boy inside,
Yeah.
you know, with time, with a little time, and just gently over time, a shift started happening. And so
Right.
that's really what I got to see, was through the self-love.
Beautiful. I love it. All right. Second question. Why do you think boundaries are important in relationships and in life?
I would just say, in a nutshell, I would say boundaries are important because they facilitate and allow for the clarity of communication, the clarity of understanding, the clarity of expectation. I think when there's clarity, then there's no confusion, and there's more space to just to love each other.
Right. Like deepening the intimacy through
Yes,
boundaries because there's
yes,
truth.
yes, yes, yeah. That's what I would say.
I love it. Well, this was so much fun. As always, mesmerized and so interested in what you're doing. I cannot wait to dive into this book. You guys watching, listening, it is available everywhere books are sold, but I do think you should go to the website because you probably want to get all of these. So that is themagicofsurrender.com.
Yes, themagicofsurrender.com.
So you're going to go get your book, and then you're going to go there and take the steps, put your receipt number in because you want to get all those beautiful bonuses. And I know all of this so well because I just went through it with my own book. But I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And where can people find you? Where do you hang out most?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook. You know, I'm beginning on Clubhouse now. It's another thing to add to the mix.
Just what we need.
Just
Well,
what
I
we
want
need.
to thank you for spending so much time with us today. I super appreciate what you're doing in the world, and just keep up the amazing work.
Much love. Thanks for having me.
Sure.